The ring in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings is an object which bestows extraordinary power on anybody who possesses it. It's obviously much sought after by the villain of the story, but even the heroes of the story struggle with the allure this ring has for them. Each of them, being people of great leadership and authority already, recognize that they could do good with this ring. But it's Gandalf who says, "I would take this ring out of desire to do good, but in me and through me it would wield a power far too great for even me to use well." He and others recognize that power would corrupt them. And so the decision is made that they must destroy the ring lest it fall into anybody else's hands. And in the end, the only people they can trust for the mission of taking the ring are the hobbits of the story. The hobbits being these curious creatures who don't desire power or wealth or fame in any way. And not having any natural love for power, this ring of power has a less power to corrupt them. And so the story begins. Today in the Gospel, we meet two of Jesus' disciples, James and John, and they would take the ring. They would have wanted the ring for themselves. What we hear happening in the Gospel is they ask Jesus for the seats at his right and his left-hand side, which means they want positions of authority. They want the prestige that comes from that position, and they want the power that comes from position. And what Jesus does is rebuke them, to say, no, those seats are not mine to give. And he goes on to give an extended teaching about the nature of power and authority and service. And it seems when we think about that this desire for power of some sort is endemic throughout human history. If we look throughout human history and even around the world now, we can see the violence and the dreadful things people will do to gain and to stay in power. And even here in Australia, with a much more genteel politics and a much more well-regulated economy, even here, though, we see that people will be willing to exaggerate, to manipulate, to pork barrel and to branch stack to get or stay in authority. So Jesus' teaching applies to them, but Jesus' teaching also applies to each of us, because each of us have power as well, whether we recognize it or not. This is something I realized for myself just this past week when a family I knew were looking to have a funeral of their father. Their local parish wouldn't let them have it in their local parish for whatever reason. They had a priest who was willing to say it, but I was able to offer them, say, look, you'd be very welcome here at OLHC Epping. And the family were just so grateful for that offer. It didn't cost me anything to do, but it made me realize that the power I have as priest to do good. And indeed, we all have that power to do good. We all have relational power. We have influence on our family and on our friends, perhaps our colleagues and others as well. If we're a teacher, we have a power to educate others. We have a financial power. We have a purchasing power. In fact, that we can make choices about what we will spend our money on, what we will buy, what we won't buy, and what we'll donate. Indeed, for myself and for you here watching this, we are in the richest 1% of the world. We have a purchasing power whether we recognize it or not. And we each have a political power as well. We have the gift of voting every few years, which again, not everyone in the world has. But more so than that, we had the capacity to speak to our elected leaders. We had the power to challenge them. And this month, some members of our parish are arranging delegations to our local federal members of parliament, to Julian Lesser and to John Alexander, to advocate for asylum seekers from Afghanistan, asking the federal government would up their intake of asylum seekers and refugees from Afghanistan to at least 20,000 people. This is a great example of using power not for themselves, but for others. And I think it's a good measure when we sign a petition, when we vote, when we may advocate or lobby in some way our politicians. Are we lobbying for something for ourselves, for a better tax break or a better position, or are we using power for others? This is what Jesus then said to do. His response to James and John is a rebuke. And indeed to all the disciples, he says, you know how the so-called great desire power and they use their power to lord it over others? This is not to be with you. He says, no, greatness is in fact service. And any power we have is to be used to serve others. And in that way, we become great. And so I think this is an important reflection for each of us. It's what Jesus then says for himself, that he as the Son of Man has come not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life for others. And so I invite you to think this week, in what way do you use the power you have, relational, financial, political, or any other way? In what way do you use that power? We do have it. And if we use it at the service of others, we become Christ-like, and we become his disciples in the way he asked James and John to be.